Listen to what Paul says about himself. Now this is the Apostle Paul. We know him as an apostle, and yet he speaks of the war. We wouldn't think that he had to struggle like you are struggling. But he says, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. So he's fleshly. He says, for that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that I do. What does he hate? He hates the way of thinking, that sinful nature. He struggles within himself. He says, and then I do that which I would not, or that I should not do. He says, I consent unto the law that is good. Now then it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. See, the heart is deceitfully wicked. He said, there's nothing good within the flesh. Verse 19, he says, for the good that I would, I do not. But the evil which I would not, that I do. Now this is Paul. He says, now if I do that I would not, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. Listen to this now. He says, I find then a law that when I would do good, evil is present with me. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man. He said that's in the mind. So he delights after this law. He delights after the word of God. But, he says, but in 23, he says, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. So he has this law, the law of God that is in his mind, that he delights in this law. But yet, in his delight, there is another law. He says the law in his members, his flesh, the law of his flesh, which is totally contradictory to the law of God. He is in war. Listen to what he says about his state. In 24, he says, O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? He, the Apostle Paul, who received all these revelations from God, who God appeared to on the road of Damascus, he himself struggled and was in a battle, was in a war, a spiritual war against himself. Let's look at the penalty for not winning this war against the flesh. We are all in this war, whether we understand it or not. Romans, the 8th chapter, and verse 5. It says, for they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. See, there are some, brothers and sisters, we are in the war and we are serving something. Either you're serving God or you're serving Satan. Period. And those who are oblivious to the war within, they are losing the war. And here is the penalty. He says, for to be carnally minded is death. See, if you totally thinking with your fleshly mind and going after the things of the flesh, the idolatry, the fornication, the adultery, the uncleanness, all these abominable things, all these things that are unlawful according to the law, statutes, and commandments of God. He says, to be that way is death. He says, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. So here we see the penalty for being fleshly minded, for not winning the war against the flesh, and yet we see the reward for walking in the Spirit, life and peace. Verse 7, he says, because the carnal mind is enmity against God. See, your natural mindset is totally against God's mindset. God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. He is totally righteous. And we are by nature wicked. He says, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. See, your natural mind can't be subject to the law of God. So what do you have to do? You have to change your mind. You have to align your mind with God's mind. You have to align your will with God's will. And how do you do that? You consume His word. You drink this water. You eat this bread, spiritually speaking. You consume it and you live according to it. You walk in the Spirit. Let's get down to 12. 12th verse, he says, therefore, brethren, we are debtors not to the flesh, to live after the flesh. For if ye live after the flesh, ye shall die. Brothers and sisters, I'm telling you here today, here and now, if you live after the flesh, you're going to die. You're going to burn in hell, in the lake of fire for eternity. You must win this war. He says, for if we live after the flesh, ye shall die. But if ye through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live. You must bring your body into subjection. You must control your thoughts, because it is these thoughts which lead to sin. Let me show you this. Let's go to James, the book of James. See the process of how this fleshly mind leads to death. James, the 1st chapter and the 13th verse. It reads, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempted he any man. See, God is not making you do this, making you sin, or tempting you. He says this. He says, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. See, the tempter is Satan. Now, Satan knows what's on your heart. He knows your desires.